Hi, I'm Dave Dinkel, and thanks for joining me in this video series of actual recent deals. This is an example of a $14,941.02 profit on an REO flip with no money in the deal. The following is a real estate deal that was recently completed by a student of ours, and the deal exemplifies some of the various aspects of how to do these transactions. So as not to embarrass anyone involved in this transaction, all parties have been kept anonymous. I'm not an attorney, CPA, or realtor, and any information found or derived in this presentation is not to be construed as legal or accounting advice. This is an example of a double closing with a first leg, or A to B, done with the student using free transactional funding. Seller A was a bank-owned REO who sold to our student B, who then sold to an end buyer C, who was an individual. No money in the deal because the student got free transactional funding. No deposit, as you'll see from the HUD statement. No credit was involved because there was no conventional lender. And there was no risk because he had no money in the deal and because it was a transactional funding deal. This particular closing agent gives us free transactional fundings for deals that are less than $80,000 if he does close both legs, the A to B and the B to C leg. In this case, you'll see it was less than $80,000. This is a great deal to see some unique features of some expenses on the HUD. It was very interesting because it was seemingly a smaller profit from the purchase and sale prices. However, the student got a repair credit before closing. Repair credit is critically important to be able to get discounts rather than asking the listing agent for a price reduction, in which case he takes a lower commission. You'll see on the repair credit the sales price remained the same, but the student got the repair credit off of the HUD statement, which reduced his net cost. Property was an REO, and the listing agent charged the seller, the lender, 12% in commissions, both fees and expenses. You'll see exactly where those were. So for agents who are doing REO properties and getting paid 2, 3, 4, 5%, here's one that was paid 12%, and it's not because it was a very, very cheap property. All of these commissions and fees are not in the commission area, line 703 of the HUD 1. You'll see exactly where they are on the second page of the HUD. So here's the HUD 1 closing statement, the A to B transaction, page 1. You'll see the purchase price for the student was $63,299. Seller, who was in this case the REO lender, received the same amount. From page 2, these are the costs for the student to close, $1,327.98. From page 2, there is a transfer tax credit, which is a debit to the seller and a credit to the buyer. There is a settlement charge to the seller, which is from page 2, and you'll see why it's $8,000 and change. Here's one of the things that's important. This is the student side of the transaction. What do you see for a deposit? Nothing. Common sense would tell you can't do a deal with zero earnest money deposit. In fact, if you've been following these recent deals I've been doing, probably a third of them have no earnest money deposit. So here's a $10,000 credit to the buyer for repairs. Here is the accrued taxes through the closing date, which is a debit to the seller and a credit to the buyer. There's the $10,000 credit to the student for the repairs. Remember, that's very, very important. It's a repair credit, not a price reduction. That saved the listing agent, in this case, $1,200, because he got 12% on the entire transaction. There's the accrued taxes. It's always a debit to the seller and a credit to the buyer. So the bottom line is, our student needed $53,268.26 for the closing, and as the seller received $43,900.72. What's important here is the student didn't have any money, so the closing agent provided free transactional funding up to $80,000, so the student needed no money to close this deal. He borrowed that transactional funding from the closing agent. Here's page 2 of the HUD from the A to B side, and what we're going to do is look at the expenses that each party paid. Right off the bat, the seller paid a real estate commission, looks like $2,190. Well, let's see what else he paid. $450 is a settlement charge, same thing for the buyer, which was the student. The abstract title charges, the abstract or title search was $200. Title insurance was $363.90. And these are just the usual charges for recording fees, and happens to be the doc stamps on the transfer of the property. Lien search, $240. So here's where it gets interesting. All of these charges are in fact miscellaneous fees. So let's go over here and look at what they are. Referral fee, closing cooperation processing fee, property management fee, a technology fee, and additional charges. See the attached addendum, which we didn't have an attached addendum, but they're charged to the seller, so frankly, we don't care what they are. Bottom line is there's the $8,439 on the front side of the HUD statement, and for our student he paid $1,327. What I decided to do was enlarge these fees and essentially commissions so you could see what they are. If you're an agent, you can do the same thing on your HUD by calling them whatever they call them here or other names. So here we go. $2,390, $945, $450, $750, $700, $299, and $2,075.76, which comes up to a total of $7,600 and change, which is exactly equivalent, by the way, to a 12% commission. Call it what you want to call it. That's what it is. So now we're going to look at the HUD closing statement for the B2C leg. This is page 1. And frankly, this is the bottom line on where the profit is for the student. So here's the sale price, $72,000, which the student received. Of course, the buyer paid $72,000. The settlement charges for the end buyer are $1,178. Paid outside of closing is $240 by the student, who actually paid, I believe, for the lien search, which we'll see on the next page. Transfer tax credit, again, it's going to always be a debit for the seller and a credit for the buyer. There's a $5,000 deposit for the end buyer C. The student put up 0 on the original A to B transaction. So in the event that the end buyer C didn't close, the student would have made $5,000 in this case. There's the closing costs for the student from page 2, which we're going to look at in just a moment or so. These are the accrued taxes from the beginning of the year until the actual closing date. The buyer gets a credit for it, and will be a debit in a second from the seller. Now, if you remember on the first A to B leg, the student had to come up with $53,000 in change, which is this amount right here. He didn't have any money or didn't want to put any money up, and he had free transactional funding. So the transactional funding person is now being paid back. That's the $53,000. Here again is the accrued taxes, which are a debit to the seller and a credit to the buyer. So the bottom line is the buyer had to come in with $66,000 and change for the purchase, and the student's net profit was $14,941.02. Now we're going to go on to page 2 and see what those expenses were that we mentioned above. So now we have the HUD closing statement, the B2C side, page 2. And we're going to look carefully at who paid what and how much it was. First of all, the student is paying a real estate fee or commission to an agent who brought him the buyer. In this case, it looks like about 2%. And buyer C is paying the settlement closing cost fee of $450. Student is paying the same thing, $450, but he's also paying for the abstract or title search. So the final result of this transaction was the student purchased the property from a lender from the purchase price of $62,299 and the sale price of $72,000. The apparent profit would be less than $9,000. However, the actual profit was $14,941.02, as I just showed you a moment ago on the page 1 of the HUD for the B2C closing. Student had no earnest money deposit, and his end buyer had put up a $5,000 deposit, so the student would have made $5,000 even if the end buyer didn't close. The student's net profit for this no out-of-pocket money was $14,941.02 because he made the listing agent aware of how to get the price reduction that he needed to make it into a better deal without reducing the agent's commission. Critically important. Thanks very much for joining me for this video series of actual recent deals.